I love myself so much that I'm going to go to the gym. I love myself so much that I don't put poison in my body. I don't drink soda. I don't eat fast food. I try my best to make healthy choices because I love myself. I love myself so much that I go to therapy because I know there are parts of me that need healing. I love myself so much that I read books that help me with that healing. And that is how self-love can actually change you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Organizational Behavior with Siphiwe Moyo. As you know, I always do. I bring you the best guests all the time. Today I have Khanyisa Mnyaka, also known as Coach Khanyi. Khanyisa is a trauma-informed self-love coach, speaker, author, and entrepreneur dedicated to helping individuals embrace their authentic selves and live purpose-driven lives. With a BA in psychology, certifications in counseling and life coaching, and an MA in gender and peace building, she has developed practical tools to empower people to become the most confident and authentic versions of themselves. Her coaching philosophy centers on self-awareness, self-compassion, and radical self-love. Khanyi, I love asking people, where in the world are you today?
I am in beautiful Austin, Texas this morning. And I say beautiful because of the weather. We have terribly hot summers here. So it's now like beginning of winter. So we have the sun and the breeze, and it's so nice to be outside. So I'm in Texas.
Great. Thank you so much for coming. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
What an honor. I think it feels weird because I think I was telling you, it feels like I know you because I've consumed a lot of your content. Do you get that a lot? Do you feel you have to reciprocate when people tell you that, or do you just take it in and just go, oh, thank you, appreciate it?
You know, I don't think I understood the scope or the reach of my work until I was at home in March. And I had people just running up to me and crying and giving me hugs and being like, your videos helped me get out of bed. I love myself now. I got out of that toxic relationship. When I had people just like have that sense of familiarity. And of course I reciprocated, except for one time I was on a bus from Joburg to Ekala, where I'm from. And at the gas station, the lady that worked there recognized me, and I was so exhausted. It still haunts me. I was so tired. And she was like, oh my God, it's you. And I was like, no. I was hoping no one would know me here. But that was the only instant where I didn't feel like I matched her energy. So hopefully I bumped into her again and I give her a hug. But of course, it feels good to understand purpose and impact, and to feel like you're doing work that really resonates with people. So I always return that energy.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. I don't know who was saying this to who, but I think they were telling them, isn't one of the tragedies that you will never really experience what you do for people and to people, and I guess if you see that impact, you can never really reciprocate. You can be warm, but you really, I don't think you'll ever understand the extent. And all you can do is just to reciprocate the energy. So do you want a rematch with her?
I do. I want a rematch with her. I might like drive home when I'm back. I'm coming back next March, and I might just drive home and stop at that same gas station and hope for the best. Order my pie. I remember I bought a pie, and she was putting my pie in the bag, and she was like, oh, she was like, I wasn't sure it was you until you spoke. I was like, oh no. And you know those bus trips, right? Like babies are crying, Udini, and it's just like, oh.
That is very, very funny. I think for those who might not know you, our audience is primarily HR executives in corporate, but also individuals, mainly in South Africa and a few other countries around. Sadek. Can you share a bit of your journey into self-love, coaching in particularly? What inspired you to focus on this area?
Oh, man, it was my life. I'm trying not to curse. It was I'm like, it's my love language, leave me alone. It was my life. I grew up very religious, and I was a queer religious child. And I grew up with a lot of shame and a lot of self-loathing because of that. And when I finally accepted the sexuality part of my identity, I recognized that even in that acceptance, I was still dealing with a lot of self-loathing. And I still dealing with a lot of like internalized negative messaging, internalized homophobia. And I was like, those are things that people cannot really take out of me but myself. So I started this journey of really learning how to love the parts of me that I was told were unlovable. And I think a lot of us experience that way, whether it's how we look, whether it is the jobs we chose, the careers we chose. I feel like we all have something that we have to come out about. And there's something that we are in the closet, quote unquote, about.
Sure.
And whatever feels like we have to hide, and whatever we're hiding, it brings shame, it brings guilt, it brings self-loathing. And so I'm like, how do we learn to love ourselves out of that shame? And so that was kind of like my journey, really. And as I watched it on myself, I noticed how it wasn't just me, it was other women, it was men. Like I love my male clients because I think men are not given the grace to be human. I think men are given the right to be angry, and that's the only emotion that they can feel. And so when I work with men, I find it's such a beautiful journey to help a man love himself. It's so weird. And because when we learn to do that, we also extend that love out, right? Anyway, I don't know why I went there, but yeah,
no, that's so cool.
That was my journey.
It's so funny because I never say I'm hurt. I always say I'm angry because just hurt sounds weak.
Yeah,
and
we have
permission for that.
Exactly. And you know what is so interesting to me is women are demonized for being angry. The angry Black woman, as if there's something wrong when a woman is angry. But men are encouraged to be angry. And we don't talk about the fact that anger is a secondary emotion to pain. So you're not really angry, you're hurt.
Oof. That is so true. I guess there is a lot of research into this, particularly in the workplace, around the fact that men are encouraged to be angry and we are loved for it. We're appreciated for it. Women, on the other hand, the angry Black woman is you cannot be angry and I guess loved at the same time. And but when you think about the fact that what you are saying, that anger is a secondary emotion, and we are really not accorded the space to say that was painful. I'm hurt.
That hurt me.
That hurt me. It's just like Utini, you know.
I go see hurt go. I remember, I was working with a male client, and we were talking about his abandonment wound. And I said to him, who was the first person to abandon you? And he was like, my grandfather when he died. And before he even tells me the story, he just breaks down and starts crying. And and I remember watching him. He's actually South African, so we're on a Zoom session. And I remember watching him crying, and he was so ashamed for crying. And I was just like, you pay me to cry to me. It's okay. And I was like, there are so many wounds that men will never be able to heal because they don't allow themselves to tap into those wounds, right? Like, we can't heal what we won't feel, right? And we can't feel what we won't face. And so asking someone, who was that first person that left you? And when we understand like the root of our wounds, we can be intentional in healing them. We understand, why am I so angry? Why am I like this in relationships? Why do I get into relationships scared that people will leave? Or it's because when I was 10 years old, granddad died and I wasn't expecting him to. And I felt left and I felt abandoned.
Yeah, do you find that your personal experiences impact your approach in coaching? And if it does, how?
I think it does a lot. And when people ask me like, what are you certified? I'm like, well, I'm certified in coaching, but what makes me effective in my work is my personal story. You know, how I was raised by poor grandparents. My mom was 19 when she had me. It's all in the book. She was 19 when she had me, and she left me at 3 months old. And I was raised by these two amazing human beings who were poor and who were doing the best they can with what they had. But there's also a lot of abuse in the home from uncles. And so those experiences, when I was deciding on choosing this as a calling or a career, I remember it was 2020. I was with a partner in Seattle and we were stuck. And I was like, I want to understand why I went through the stuff that I went through. And I was like, it can't just be because, you know what I mean? I'm like, it can't just be, well, that's how life is. Go figure it out. And I had this thing where I was like, I want to put purpose in the pain. And I was like, and how do I package all of these things that I've been through and use it to help other people? My journey with people pleasing was watching my mom be in a very toxic marriage that had her dead by 36 years old, right? And so those personal stories and those personal experiences, when I talk about anxious attachment styles, it's not because it's something that I read in a book, it's something that I've experienced. What also helps me though is the background in psychology, because then that kind of gets me to learn how to understand people's context of their story. I can't coach you the way I would coach someone that's from the Western world, because your nuances are different. And the blessing for me is having been able to live in different countries in the world. So I know that what goes on in Asia and the cultural context of Asian women and Asian men and Asian stories is different from African stories.
How do you define self-love? Is it the same as self-acceptance? And if not, how do they differ?
I don't think they differ. Well, I explain self-love with being able, and I actually like the term radical self-love, because I think for a long time we have said self-care equals self-love. And as important as it is to be someone who cares about themselves, like, you know what, you go to the spa with the girls and you drink your champagne and you go get your massage and you go do all of that, that's self-care. But radical self-love is learning how to love yourself as a holistic individual. How do I love every single thing about myself, including the stuff that I want to change? How do I love the good and the bad and the in-between, the beautiful and the ugly, right? How do I love the way I respond? Because I think when we look at ourselves and say, I am who I am because of the life that I have lived. And that also means the person I am now, I have had to create in order to survive life, in order to survive everything that I've been through. People pleasing kept me safe. People pleasing made me feel loved, made me feel validated. So as much as it is a behavior that I had that I want to change and overcome, It's something that I had to be so that I can feel safe and seen. And so instead of saying, I hate this about myself, I allow it and I look at it and I go, thank you. But I'm at a point in my life now where I don't need you to exist. Actually, you are holding me back in a lot of ways. And then I become intentional in how I change. And I think when we change from self-love, that change is more sustainable.
So you can't loathe yourself to change.
Oh my God, you can't, because now you're introducing shame. You're introducing self-judgment, right? You're introducing self-blame. You can't loathe yourself to do anything, and it's not going to be sustainable. Even when people are trying to change their habits, I'm like, well, what does that habit protect you from? Oh, you're mad that you scroll on TikTok for 4 hours. What are you trying to avoid by scrolling? Because you created that habit in order to get something out of your system. And so we're not going to loathe it, because now you're going to introduce all this other crap that you have to work through.
I always find it fascinating. So I grew up in HR and organizational behavior all my life. And when we have conversations like these, many of my colleagues push back and say words like healing, self-love are very difficult to introduce in the workplace. It's almost like do all your inner work somewhere else. We're just here to work.
Don't you wish it was that simple, right? Where there's a button we can press and go, this is work, Khanyi, this is work, Siphiwe, and that's the home one.
Yeah.
That's not realistic. Anyway, What was your question?
Yeah, so my question was, in fact, would you offer any argument against that thinking?
Absolutely. And the argument I would offer is there is no button that we can press. Have you ever walked into a room at work with people and you can tell, Uguti, this person is not mad at what's going on in this room. This person brought that rage with them from home and they are spilling it onto us. And that's because there is no reset button. There's no way you can be like, you know what, my husband pissed me off, but I'm not going to bring that shit to work. It's coming with you. And that would be the argument. And it is, how do we encourage people in the workplace to learn to set boundaries? If my employees are burnt out, they are not performing at their maximum peak because they're tired. So I'm not getting the results that I want from them.
This is fascinating for me, and it's interesting because even when coaching was introduced in the workplace, and I think I was still in HR, in corporate HR at that time, we even wanted to regulate how this coaching will work. We offered definitions like therapy looks backwards, coaching looks forward. Can you just coach them a little bit quick so that they will perform? You don't have to. Don't ask them what happened when they were 4, because we just need to get them just healed enough so that they can work. They can work. And as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, I think some of those definitions are we still use them in the HR community to say therapy looks backwards, coaching looks forward. Have you ever had anything like that?
Yeah, and I also define coaching as that. Coaching does look forward. Coaching is, this is where I am now, and that's where I want to go. And it sounds really pretty, but it's not realistic, because I have to know why I'm here. You want to talk about limiting beliefs? You have a lot of people in the workplace doing jobs that they don't believe they can do. And so it's like, where does that belief come from? So we have a lot of people in the workplace that have imposter syndrome, right? How can you be at your best when you're constantly worried that you're doing something wrong? You're not good enough for this job. Someone else should have gotten it, right? And it's like, where does that belief come from? And if I don't know that, I'm not going to give you therapy because I'm not a therapist, but this is why I say I'm a trauma-informed life coach, because our trauma affects how we even make decisions. Our trauma affects how we react to situations. Our trauma informs our triggers, right? And so if I don't know that, and I'm like, I just want to get you there, I don't give a shit about what happened to you back then, it's not going to work.
It's not. I remember I remember struggling with there was this time when I was in the talent pool at work, and I think, but one of the feedback I got from my manager is that for some reason I'm so uncomfortable with exco people. So I was middle management at the time, but it just looked to my manager that I'm overly humble when the exco members. I just no self-advocacy.
Well, yes, man.
Yes. I was like, but I know where it come from. After that, I remember growing up in church, the relationship we had with authority was you will be humble. There is protocol. Self-promotion is frowned upon. Self-advocacy is
be humble.
Just like be humble, and I guess that's where you realize that you cannot go forward until you understand what happened before that make you behave the way you behave now.
Absolutely. And it's also like, people want to move forward and they want to grow, or say like grow in their careers, grow in their businesses. I need to know what are the fears that are holding you back. And if I don't know that, I can't help you grow. Are you afraid of succeeding? Are you afraid of failing? What's the story behind the fear?
And for me, coaching is weird because I don't think anyone would ever say I'm fearful of succeeding just until you do a bit of work, right? I mean, if you asked me on a coffee shop, are you afraid of succeeding? I'm like, me, never.
Me, never, ever.
Bring it on.
I'll take it all. But here's the thing. You know what failing feels like. You've failed before. Didn't kill you. You've tried and you fail. Why would you fear an outcome that you are already so familiar with? But you don't know what succeeding feels like. That's the unknown for you. That's what most people are afraid of succeeding because they have no point of reference. They don't know what a successful version of themselves look like. But they know what a failing version of themselves look like. It's easy to say, I'm afraid of failure. That one is acceptable. We can make sense of that. Of course, you don't want to fail. What's hard to reckon with is I'm actually afraid of succeeding because that story is unknown to me. That's a version that I've never been.
What are some of the things people do that could be an indicator that you are afraid of success? Self-sabotage, maybe.
Oh, that was the first one that actually popped into my head. Self-sabotage. Absolutely. It's like, I know what I want, but I'm going to create scenarios around what I want so that and there's this whole thing, right? Our brains are so powerful. You go, I know what I want, and I'm going to go do something about it. And then you actually don't, and you keep talking about it. But then you convince yourself that you're doing something about it, but you're actually just talking about it. And your brain is keeping you safe from that result of success by you thinking you are doing something. Have you ever met people who are always stuck in the planning phase of an idea?
I have.
Because
he's here in studio with me. I'm joking, G.
Oh no, G. Because that phase is fun. Oof. That phase has no threat to you. That phase will not have you out on your ass, embarrassed, potentially. That phase has no failure or success. You're just planning. The threat and where your ego protects you a lot is when it comes to execution. And that's where we need to pay the most focus on.
What are the common misconceptions around and I'm going to phrase it the way you do, radical self-love, that you've ever had people maybe push back, or what they think radical self-love is when it's actually not?
That it's selfish. That's the big one, that it is selfish. And I hear people say that so many times. People say I'm selfish when I say, and you have to think about self-love too as boundary setting, right? And self-advocacy, being able to say, no, I'm not going to do that. No, I don't have capacity to do that. And a lot of us are surrounded by people who are only used to our yes, people who've never heard us say no before. And to those people, our no feels selfish. People forget how many times you've said yes. And that one time you say no, that one time you say no, now you're selfish. Now you're self-centered. Now you're self-obsessed, right? And that is one of the reasons that people don't lean into the hard parts of radical self-love. It's not easy to be radically self-loving. And that journey can also be isolating because you are with people who have heavily benefited on your lack of boundaries, on your self-loathing. And so your self-love and your boundary setting is a threat to their very existence in your life.
Does that mean there are many of us who have a sense that we should love ourselves a little bit more, put boundaries and so on, but for the sake of community, for the sake of belonging, we decide inadvertently or otherwise to say, oh, you know what, I'm going to do exactly what I think I shouldn't do, because the pain of loneliness is probably a bit higher.
It's actually most of us. It's majority of us. And what I say to people who, when my clients are like, it's just lonely, and I say to them, if you have to be a people pleaser, if you have to wear masks, if you have to shape shift, if you have to be inauthentic to belong, that's not true belonging. That's fitting in. There's a difference with fitting in and belonging. And so if you have to be someone you're not to fit in, then you are already alone and you're already lonely. You might as well be who you are and attract your tribe as who you are versus this contorted version of yourself that you don't even like. A lot of us don't like ourselves. Most people don't like themselves. But as you said, because and some of us are surrounded by people we commiserate with, and we're surrounded by people we throw the best pity parties with. And when we start saying, you know what, I am moving away from this victimhood mentality, but that's the mentality that kept me connected to community. Of course, it's going to be a struggle for me to step away from that.
Yo. This is very interesting for me, because the kind of things that are coming to my head is, in organizations, do we actually want people who radically love themselves?
Do you think organizations would succeed if people loved themselves and set boundaries in terms of, you know what, Siphiwe, I work 9 to 5. I don't take work home. I don't work on the weekends. I fill my cup. I spend time with my family. Do you think that's something that organizations would actually encourage people to do without worrying that it will hit their bottom line?
Intuitively, I want to say no. I just want to think about what I'm wondering. Intuitively, it's a no. I think it's a no. But I'm wondering, how does a person who actually has worked on themselves and radically loved themselves, once we as leadership have actually grappled with this and we respect their boundaries, and how would they actually show up? Is there any possibility that we could actually get the best out of this person?
Yes.
Of course,
Yes.
there will be discomfort with the fact that they push back on these little things that we fall in love with as leadership, but eventually maybe we would get the best out of them and more
Yes.
productivity and so on.
1,000%. My job after I got my green card here, I was in recruiting at Facebook. And tech is it's just a different world on its own. But I remember some of the benefits were so centered around mental health. They were like, yes, you have a mental health stipend. You have access to a life coach should you want one. We pay for 20 sessions of therapy for you. Your relationship with your manager, like tell your manager you're not feeling good. You have PTO. They really, that company had this focus on, we want you to be feeling good, because when you are feeling good, you are producing at a higher performance level versus you coming exhausted, you coming burnt out, you coming resentful, and you can't feel all those things and still be at your best.
You can't. You'll give the organization the hours, but the quality of those hours,
exactly, they're going to be different. There are countries in, I think, Europe where they have a 4-day work. And they were like, that 4-day work, when they introduced that, performance actually got better because people got to rest more. People had more energy.
I'm imagining now that benefit of saying you have access to a life coach, and I mean, in most organizations now, you might get approved for a life coach if you tell us why you deserve a life coach.
You really need one.
Yeah, you really need one. But I'm just imagining, imagine if everybody had access to a life coach, but not only do you have access, you're encouraged to debrief and have conversations with the life coach. How much impact would it have? Because I mean, we speak about wounded leadership, that sometimes you really don't even know why the person is behaving this way. And if you gave them a little bit of a platform to do a bit of work, we would actually have thriving teams.
Exactly. And now, have you heard this thing where people don't quit their jobs, people quit their managers?
Absolutely.
I've had clients who quit their jobs, like careers that they really loved, because the manager was harmful to them. So can you imagine if we take that manager and we say, go do some internal work? I had a client who was like, my team says I'm unapproachable. She was in the finance world. And she was like, I want to learn how to be a better leader. And I was like, let's introduce compassionate leadership. So I was coaching her on compassionate leadership. And about 2 weeks before our time together ended, she was like, I didn't know what to call it, but for the first time, I had my interns come to me and ask me questions and say when they were not feeling good, let me know. And she was like, and these are things that I was struggling with, because my energy to them prior to coaching was just, don't come talk to me, don't approach me. And I'm like, and then it's all messed up from there. Then you're not getting what you want from them.
You're not getting what you want. And one of the things we speak about a lot, and hopefully people now understand this, that the kind of inner work and the kind of work that we do, maybe even in broader organizational behavior, you have to understand that there is a bottom line cost of bad leadership. So if I'm hiding the mistakes that I'm making, if I'm not asking you a question as my leader based on what you've just said, what is the cost of that? I have to I'm not performing to the optimum because I'm hiding a mistake. I can't approach you. And now all of a sudden the shift that you've seen, now this person is approachable. They can ask them questions and the impact is huge.
And her leadership and the connection to her team is different, right? Now the team, they trust her. I can go to my leader for this. And also leadership is about, when we think about a leader, this is someone that has to teach you. And this is someone that has to be a steward of your work in some sense. If I'm afraid to go to this person because I'm going to be yelled at, and also this idea, I mean, when I say this part, people think I'm crazy. I'm like, why do managers think they can just talk to us like we're children? Why do people get so infantilized in the workspace? I'm a grown person, talk to me like that. Just because you're my manager doesn't mean that you get to talk to me like I'm a child. How do we train leaders to see people's humanity first, right? Before the pride of being a leader. Like, I'm a leader, okay, and then what? What are you leading? What are you teaching? Right, because if people are afraid to ask you questions, you're not teaching them anything.
You're not teaching them anything at all. So if maybe a leader is listening to this, watching this, and starting to think, oh, maybe I'm a bit curious. I think maybe there is merit to this argument. What do you think they could change, or what are just one or two things that they could start doing maybe differently to create this environment where the people in the team could bring their whole self to work, bring their authentic self, their radical self-loved self to work? What are one or two things that leaders can do to create such an environment?
Well, they can hire a life coach, but the song by Michael Jackson, Man in the Mirror, comes to mind. I think a lot of the times we think it's the external that needs attention, but for real transformation to happen, it's the internal. So I would say to those leaders, ask yourself the questions. How am I as a leader? Am I approachable? Like, you can't encourage your team to approach you when your energy is unapproachable. Right? And so I think it's like, what are some of the things that I need to work on so that I can be an effective leader? Because it's not about your team, it's about you.
Yes.
Yeah.
I absolutely. All right. Some of the pushback against the message of radical self-love is the assumption that what people like you are actually saying is that you should not do anything about the things that need changing in your life, right? So if maybe I'm like, I love myself. What is that phrase?
I can't do it in the right. Well, that's self-arrogance, and it lacks self-responsibility.
So that's not what radical self-love is.
The example I just gave, I had an interview right before this one. And the example I gave was like my relationship with the gym. When I started working out, it was like, God, I'm fat, or I just want to be sexy. And it had nothing to do with loving myself. And now that I've been on this journey for this past 4 or 5 years, it's been like, I love myself so much that I'm going to go to the gym. I love myself so much that I don't put poison in my body. I don't drink soda. I don't eat fast food. I try my best to make healthy choices because I love myself. I love myself so much that I go to therapy because I know there are parts of me that need healing. I love myself so much that I read books that help me with that healing. And that is how self-love can actually change you. It's not about you staying the same. It's actually encouraging you to be the best version of yourself, whatever that looks like for you.
So imagining a drill surgeon in my room going, Vuka, Zitande, Hamba. That's not the way to do it, I guess.
Well, it's also not going to work. You're going to start hating that drill surgeon. The part of self-compassion, you have people who eat food, right, because it fills a void in them. And the self-compassion part is what happened to you. It's not self-pity. I always tell people there's a difference between the two. Self-pity is like shame, and self-pity is like blame everyone else, blame your mom, blame your grandparents, blame the government, blame the world, while you stay the same. But self-compassion is you are going to change, but you are also going to be aware of the things that happen to you. So we're not going to drill sergeant you. We're not going to, even when my clients are studying their work, some of them will be like, Coach, I want to be at the gym for 7 days. I'm like, no, you're going to be there for 3. Don't do too much.
Yeah.
And that's and like grow muscle by muscle by muscle by muscle. And that's where self-compassion comes in.
When I have briefing meetings with my clients, so when I have a stage persona when I speak on stages, and I'm funny on stage, which never comes through in meetings. And during the meeting, people will be like, they said you are funny. You haven't made a joke.
I'm not laughing.
So as I'm sitting here, I'm also thinking about you. You haven't said, baby, this is what you're going to do. Baby,
You're like, excuse me, where's my baby? It's so funny. I think I'm the opposite. Like in real life, I'm really funny. Yeah. And so when people hang out with me in real life, they're like, oh, we don't get to see the side of you. I'm like, no, because I work on social media.
That's very, very cool. Okay, so I want to then think about some of the common barriers that individuals face in embracing self-love. What do you, especially, so I don't, corporate is a weird place these days. There is, I don't know how to refer it, but maybe hectic Olympics. Everyone wants to be known as being hectic. It looks like if you are happy, you don't have enough work. So everybody just wants, I'm hectic. You're hectic? You're hectic?
hectic. We're hustling. We're all hustling.
Yeah. That hustling and grind culture at the moment at work is quite huge. And so I'm thinking about if I want to embrace this kind of radical self-love, which I also think showing up and being competent maybe is a part of that self-love.
Absolutely.
What do you think would be the common barriers of hearing this message and thinking I'm going to put myself first in the workplace? Or is there any one or two things that I can do to just take it gradually? As you were saying, I don't have to start now going to the gym 7 times a day. What are one or two things that I need to do to just show up for myself better?
Well, I think the first thing you asked was like, what are the barriers, right?
Yes.
And you kind of touched on it when you were asking the question, which is a lot of the times it's other people's opinions. How am I going to be perceived? What are people going to think of me? We are a culture that is steeped in keeping up with appearances, kind of like keeping up with the Joneses. You see it a lot in family dynamics. You have a house with mom and dad and 2 kids, and they look picture perfect. But when you go inside, right? When you go inside, they might as well burn that house down.
Sure.
Because there's nothing perfect about it. And we do that with our lives too. I'm going to present this polished version of myself. That doesn't really exist because no one's perfect. Nobody. And that is, I think, is one of the beauties of our humanity, that we are not perfect beings. We would be bored if we were perfect. But the fact that we are these beings that have the opportunity to constantly grow and evolve and be better, that is the beauty of our human experience. And so the barriers is this idea of perfection. It's also, Siphiwe, where we live in a world where people don't know themselves. And so because we don't know ourselves, we lack authenticity. How can I be authentic if I don't know who I am? Who am I being authentic as? Right? And the moment we start to sit with who am I really and understand that that person is who needs to show up at work because she's fantastic. And then we start seeing ourselves that way. Those are the barriers.
Yeah, the idea of authenticity is always fascinating for me because I also think, can I really be authentic fully? Surely I need to moderate a little bit, which is where the code switching comes in. If I want to be accepted, Kaslami, I can. I have to, use a different language to connect with people. When is that inauthentic, and when is it just understanding context?
It's funny. I got a text the other day from my aunt, my brother, the youngest of my brothers, who's my cousin. But we don't do that cousin thing. But
Sure.
My youngest brother, and he started his new job in Joburg, and he's very fashionable. So sometimes he'll just wear a duke, the statually clear babes for no reason. And I got a text from my aunt last week, and it said they made fun of him at work because ufike etwele prayer. And she was like, I was so happy they did that because La Kriya was driving me crazy, right?
Yeah.
And for him, that's who he is. He's this very tall Black man who loves fashion and he loves playing with clothes and going like very eccentric with how he shows up. But he's in a space where that's not appropriate. Right?
Yeah.
And that's not him being inauthentic, but that's him understanding where he is. Read the room too. It's not being inauthentic, it's being like, oh, this is what's appropriate here. Like Nandia Tuka, I love it. I just love throwing in an F-bomb wherever I can. But there are times where it's not appropriate. It doesn't mean I'm being inauthentic, but I'm understanding the context of my environment. I won't be sitting with my grandmother and be like, listen, F that, Google. You know what I mean? Like, although in her old age, her favorite word has been all the curse words, but it's not. Inauthenticity is when I find myself being completely different people. And inauthenticity is, this time I believe this one thing with this group, but then I now believe something else. It's like, no, who am I here? So those things that you're talking about, code switching, and which, it's not about, oh, this is who I am, but it is like, I am in a space where I understand kind of like the rules of engagement and I behave accordingly.
So good. I want to nudge us to a close, but I want to get your thoughts on two main things that I think, two main concepts that we use a lot in organizational behavior and in HR: wellness on one hand and DEI on the other. And how...
Oh, don't say that. Don't say DEI in America. They hate it here.
Yeah, especially now. Yo. It almost looked like you're making a bit of headway with DEI until...
But they don't even know what it means.
Yeah.
And like, I'm sitting like, what is DEI? I don't know. I just know I don't want it.
I just know I don't want it.
I just know I don't want it. What? Okay.
That is so funny. That is so funny. I think a lot of... I don't even know how you guys are coping with what's just happening now.
Okay, your question.
The message of radical self-love, which you've told us emanate mostly from knowing self, it feels to me that if we did that work, both in our wellness programs and in our DEI programs, at least in South Africa, we grapple with diversity and inclusion a bit more. It's understandable a little bit more, but it feels to me it would be a little bit more richer if we taught people radical self-love, self-awareness, and so on. What's your sense on that statement?
Well, I think if we looked at it in this way, right, it's like DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. And when I was doing my DEI training, there was an added layer of belonging.
Yes.
Right? And so it's like, if we wanted a diverse workplace, we should want a workplace where people feel like they can show up as themselves. That's diversity. It's like diversity in ideas, diversity in identity, diversity in background, in culture. But for us to encourage diversity, shouldn't we also encourage authenticity and self-love and self-acceptance, so you can add on to the DEI part of the company?
I think you're right. I think you're right. And a colleague of mine said something interesting, that he was raised in Sebokeng and now is an executive, as an ex-co member in Sandton, and he says sometimes he feels like the organization is missing out on his authentic Sebokeng experience because he self-regulates. He just at the moment he just doesn't think that experience is welcome on the table, and he polishes it and moderates it and so on. But that doesn't help the actual diversity that is needed, the divergent view that is needed in that conversation at that time.
Exactly. We want diversity, but then we are uncomfortable when people show up with that diversity. When I was at Facebook, they had these goals about like, we want to hire this many people and this many different identities by the year 2030 and blah, blah, blah. And I remember asking them in the training, like, why has this not happened? You guys have been around for so long. And then they said, oh, we have a retention issue. And I was like, ding, 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 ding. So you get these people to come in, and then you don't accept them for the diversity that you hired them for, and they leave.
Yeah.
It's being like, oh, come into the room, but we don't have a seat for you at the table. We do have a little couch you can put yourself in at the corner, though. That's not diversity.
Hi, I value Lincoln's. You ugqibile. I think for me that is enough. I want to do two things as we close, because we've run out of time, and I really want to invite people to really get more of your work and understand what you do more, because I really think it is really, really life-changing. But I want you to think about maybe let me create a scenario. You have like 40 seconds with people, particularly leaders and HR leaders in the workplace, who we want to entice. We want them to at least grapple with these ideas of self-love, radical self-love, just to grapple, to entice, and you want to just invoke a sense of curiosity, enough curiosity to then go and do the work, and we're putting this into their intranet and whatever. What would you use that 40 seconds and say?
I would say when I used to go to church, there was a scripture that said, "My cup, it runneth over." And when I think about that scripture, for me, David is saying, I have poured so much into my own cup that I have enough for everyone else around me.
Sure.
And I think that's what leadership should look like. I think a lot of the times leaders themselves are exhausted because they keep pouring from an empty cup. What if you just paused a little bit and you pour into your own cup, so you too can say, my cup runneth over, and you lead from that place of overflow instead of scarcity? Because when we do that, then we're pouring from empty cups where we don't have enough love for ourselves. How can we have love for our work? How can we have love for our team members? Like, how can we even have love for our families, right? Like, how do I pour into my own life so that everyone I come into contact with gets the share of my overflow?
I know you are done. Thank you very much. So I think lastly, for listeners interested in learning more about your work, how best can they connect with you? What is the name of your book, and where do they get it? And just some ideas on where they can connect more with your book, or your work.
The best way to connect with my work, if you want to talk to me directly, would be my email, and I'm happy if you just put it in the show description.
Okay.
Also, my Instagram is, if you just shoot me a DM at Life Coach Khanyi. My book, I think in South Africa, it's on Take-A-Lot, and I'm trying to get it on Amazon. It's called You Belong Here, Your Roadmap to Authenticity, Purpose, and one more thing I forgot.
But you belong here. Maybe the subtitle.
But you belong here.
You belong here. That's enough for now. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us. It was incredible. It was amazing. Your work is needed. Your work is appreciated. You are appreciated. Thank you for the work that you've done. Because having read your book, I know you've had to do a lot of work to get here. I wanna say that it was worth it. There are so many people who are being healed because you did the hard work, and I just want more and more people to be healed because of you. So thank you very much.
Oh no, you're gonna make me cry. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Khanyi. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm even changing my tone. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.
This was so good. Thank you. I hate that I have to run, but thank you. I'm coming home in March, so please let's connect.
I will reach out, and I want to plan something around it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.